Black USB ports. Black USB ports are the baseline, the reference point, the thing every other color gets compared to because it spent 2 decades being absolutely everywhere. Black ports are USB 2.0, which launched in the year 2000 and delivered transfer speeds up to 480 megabits per second. That was genuinely impressive at the time, especially compared to the glacial 12 megabits per second that came before it. But by modern standards, 480 megabits per second is almost comically slow. You are looking at around 60 megabytes per second in real-world performance, assuming everything goes perfectly, which it never does. USB 2.0 only transfers data in one direction at a time, send or receive, not both. This means if your external hard drive is trying to read and write simultaneously, it takes turns, which cuts performance even further. For a wireless mouse or a basic keyboard, this does not matter at all. Those devices barely use any bandwidth. Same goes for printers, webcams, older USB microphones, or charging cables for devices that do not support fast charging. Black ports handle all of that without breaking a sweat. The problem starts when you try moving actual files. Transferring a 4 gigabyte video file over USB 2.0 takes over a minute under ideal conditions. Backing up 50 gigabytes of photos to an external drive, you are waiting 15 minutes minimum, probably longer. If you plug a modern solid-state drive into a black port, you have just turned a high-performance storage device into something that performs worse than a cheap thumb drive from 2015. The drive is not broken, the port is just choking it. Black USB ports also deliver low power. They max out at 2.5 watts, which is 5 volts at 500 milliamps. That is enough to charge a wireless mouse or power a small USB fan, but completely inadequate for anything demanding. Try charging a modern smartphone through a black port, and you will get the slowest trickle charge possible. Your phone might even lose battery if you are using it while plugged in. So why do black ports still exist? Because they are cheap, stable, and backward compatible with literally every USB device ever made. Motherboards still include them for basic peripherals and legacy support. They also show up as dedicated ports for BIOS updates on some motherboards, where speed does not matter, but reliability does. Black USB ports are not fast. They are not powerful, but they are the slow baseline everything else is compared to. White USB ports. White USB ports are ancient history, genuine museum pieces. These are USB 1.0 and USB 1.1, which first appeared in 1996 when the entire concept of universal serial bus was brand new. The goal back then was simple: create one standardized port that could replace the mess of serial ports, parallel ports, and proprietary connectors cluttering the back of every computer. It worked, technically, but the performance was borderline painful even by late 1990s standards. USB 1.0 had 2 speed modes. Low speed ran at 1.5 megabits per second, which was acceptable for a keyboard or mouse because those devices send tiny amounts of data. Full speed reached 12 megabits per second, which sounds faster until you realize that is roughly 1.5 megabytes per second at best. Transferring a single floppy disk worth of data, just 1.44 megabytes, would take about a second. Transferring a CD worth of data, around 700 megabytes, would take over 7 minutes, and that is assuming perfect conditions, which never happened. USB 1.1 arrived in 1998 and fixed some bugs, but the speed stayed the same. The real limitation was not just the transfer rate. USB 1.0 and 1.1 could only move data in one direction at a time, just like USB 2.0, except USB 2.0 was 40 times faster, so the one direction problem was less noticeable. With USB 1.1, you felt every single bottleneck. White ports were designed for low-speed peripherals, keyboards, mice, joysticks, and early digital cameras. Anything more demanding was a disaster. External hard drives technically worked on USB 1.1, but nobody used them because the experience was miserable. Scanners worked, barely. Printers worked, slowly. The technology was functional, but only in the most generous interpretation of that word. By the time USB 2.0 launched in 2000, white ports became obsolete almost overnight. Manufacturers kept them around for a few years out of necessity, but by the mid-2000s, they had vanished completely. If you see a white USB port today, you are looking at a computer from the late 1990s or very early 2000s. It belongs in a tech museum, not your desk. The only reason to know white ports exist is to understand how far USB technology has come, from 1.5 megabits per second to 40 gigabits per second in less than 30 years. White ports were the beginning, and they were extremely slow. Blue USB ports. Blue USB ports are probably the most recognizable color in the entire USB ecosystem. They represent USB 3.0, which launched in 2008 and was marketed as super speed USB. The blue color was intentional. Manufacturers needed a way way to visually distinguish these new high-speed ports from the black USB 2.0 ports sitting right next to them. So they made the plastic insert inside the port bright blue. It worked. If you see blue, you know you are getting significantly better performance than black. USB 3.0 delivers transfer speeds up to 5 gigabits per second. That is roughly 625 megabytes per second in theoretical maximum throughput, though real-world performance usually lands somewhere between 300 and 400 megabytes per second depending on the device and cable quality. Compared to USB 2.0's 60 megabytes per second, this is a massive upgrade. Transferring a 4 gigabyte video file drops from over a minute down to around 10 seconds. Backing up 50 gigabytes of photos goes from 15 minutes to maybe 2 or 3 minutes. The difference is immediately noticeable. The speed boost comes from additional data pins inside the connector. USB 2.0 had 4 pins. USB 3.0 added 5 more, bringing the total to 9. These extra pins enable full duplex communication, which means the port can send and receive data simultaneously instead of taking turns. This is a fundamental improvement that eliminates one of the biggest bottlenecks in USB 2.0. An external solid-state drive can now read and write at the same time without performance collapsing. Blue ports are ideal for external storage, solid-state drives, traditional hard drives, high-capacity thumb drives, and anything that benefits from faster file transfers. They also work well for high-resolution webcams, especially models that stream 1080p or 4K video, and for video capture cards that need consistent bandwidth. Blue ports are also backward compatible with USB 2.0 and USB 1.1 devices, though those older devices will only run at their native slower speeds. But here is where it gets confusing. USB 3.0 was later renamed USB 3.1 Gen 1, and then renamed again to USB 3.2 Gen 1. All three names refer to the exact same 5 gigabit per second speed. The USB Implementers Forum, the organization that manages USB standards, decided to rebrand everything under the USB 3.2 umbrella to simplify the naming scheme. It did not simplify anything. It made everything worse. A blue port could be labeled USB 3.0, USB 3.1 Gen 1, or USB 3.2 Gen 1, and all three mean identical performance. Blue means faster than black, but not necessarily fast anymore. Teal, light blue USB ports. Teal USB ports, sometimes called light blue or cyan, represent USB 3.1 Gen 2, which doubles the speed of the standard blue ports. Instead of 5 gigabits per second, you get 10 gigabits per second. That translates to roughly 1.25 gigabytes per second in theoretical throughput, though real-world transfers usually hit between 700 and 900 megabytes per second. This is genuinely fast enough that the port itself stops being the bottleneck for most consumer devices. The limitation becomes the storage device or cable quality instead. USB 3.1 Gen 2 launched in 2013, and like USB 3.0 before it, it was later renamed to USB 3.2 Gen 2. Same standard, different label, identical performance. The teal color was meant to distinguish these faster ports from regular blue USB 3.0 ports, but the problem is that teal is not a mandatory standard. It is a suggestion. Some manufacturers use teal, others use dark blue. Some just paint everything black and call it a day. You cannot reliably identify a 10 gigabit per second port by color alone, which defeats the entire purpose of color coding in the first place. Teal ports are rare compared to blue or black ports. They cost more to implement, and most consumer devices do not need 10 gigabits per second of bandwidth. A wireless mouse does not care. A keyboard does not care. Even most external hard drives cannot saturate a 5 gigabit per second connection, let alone a 10 gigabit per second one. The devices that actually benefit from teal ports are high-end external solid-state drives, professional video capture cards, and high-speed storage arrays. If you are editing 4K video off an external drive, a teal port makes a noticeable difference. If you are just backing up documents and photos, it does not matter. The other issue is that teal ports are often mislabeled or confused with regular blue ports. Two ports sitting side by side might look nearly identical in color, but one runs at 5 gigabits per second and the other at 10 gigabits per second. Unless the manufacturer prints a label or symbol next to the port, you have no way to know which is which without checking the motherboard or laptop specifications. This is not a theoretical problem. It happens constantly. People plug high-performance devices into what they think is a fast port, only to discover later they were using the slower blue port the entire time. Teal ports also still use the USB Type-A connector, the same rectangular shape that has existed since the 1990s. This matters because USB Type-A has physical limitations. It maxes out at 10 gigabits per second. Anything faster requires USB Type-C. So if you see a Teal Type-A port, you know the absolute ceiling is 10 gigabits per second. Two blue-looking ports can perform completely differently. Red and yellow USB ports. Red USB ports do not indicate speed. This is the first major twist in USB color coding, and it catches people off guard because every other color up to this point has been about data transfer rates. Red ports are about power delivery. Specifically, they indicate always-on charging capability or sleep and charge functionality. The port stays powered even when your computer or laptop is completely shut down, as long as the device has battery remaining or is plugged into wall power. The red port keeps supplying electricity. This lets you charge a phone, wireless earbuds, a smartwatch, or a portable battery pack without turning the computer on. The confusion comes from the fact that red ports can support different USB speeds depending on the manufacturer. Some red ports are USB 2.0, running at 480 megabits per second. Others are USB 3.0 or USB 3.1 Gen 2, running at 5 or 10 gigabits per second. The color tells you nothing about data performance. It only tells you the port delivers higher current than standard ports and likely stays active during sleep or shutdown. Red USB ports are chargers first, data ports second. Red ports became common on gaming motherboards and high-end laptops around 2017. Manufacturers wanted a visual indicator for ports that could charge devices overnight without leaving the entire system running. The feature is genuinely useful, especially for people who travel frequently or use their laptop as a charging hub for multiple devices. But the implementation is inconsistent. Some manufacturers require you to enable the feature in BIOS settings. Others enable it by default. Some red ports only work when the laptop is asleep, not fully powered off. Others work in both states. There is no universal standard. Yellow USB ports follow the same logic as red ports. They indicate always-on power delivery. But yellow appears more often on business laptops and workstations instead of gaming hardware. Yellow ports usually support USB 3.0 speeds, so 5 gigabits per second. But like red ports, the speed is not guaranteed. The defining feature is constant power. You can charge a phone, camera, or power bank without turning the computer on. This is one of the most practical features for mobile use, and it eliminates the need to carry a separate wall charger for low-power devices. The contrast between red and yellow is minimal. Red ports often indicate smart charging with slightly higher current output, while yellow ports are simply always on. But again, this varies by manufacturer. Some brands use red for 10 gigabit ports with charging. Others use yellow for the same thing. Some use orange instead of red or yellow entirely. The lack of standardization makes color coding nearly useless for power-related features. You cannot look at a red or yellow port and know exactly what it does without reading the manual or motherboard specifications. Orange ports, USB-C's color problem, how to actually identify ports, and the reality of USB colors. Orange USB ports are manufacturer-defined, which is a polite way of saying they mean whatever the company that made your computer wants them to mean. There is no official USB specification for orange. Some manufacturers use orange to indicate always-on charging, just like red or yellow. Others use orange for diagnostic ports or service-only connections that are not meant for regular use. Intel used orange on some motherboards to indicate enhanced charging capability with higher current output. Industrial equipment manufacturers have used orange to indicate ports with reinforced retention mechanisms that physically lock the connector in place. Orange USB ports only mean what the manufacturer says they mean, and if they do not tell you, you are guessing. This brings us to USB Type-C, which killed color coding entirely. USB-C ports are almost always black or sometimes gray, and the color tells you absolutely nothing. A black USB-C port could support USB 2.0 at 480 megabits per second. It could support USB 3.2 Gen 2 at 10 gigabits per second. It could support USB 4 at 40 gigabits per second. It could support Thunderbolt 3 or Thunderbolt 4. It could be a charging-only port with no data capability whatsoever. The same physical connector handles all of these standards, and manufacturers do not use color to differentiate them because there are too many variations. USB-C made the connector universal, but it also made visual identification impossible. So how do you actually figure out what a USB port can do? You look for symbols printed next to the port. The USB Trident logo by itself usually indicates USB 2.0 or basic compatibility. If you see the letters SS, that stands for super speed, which means USB 3.0 or USB 3.0 3.1 Gen 1 at 5 gigabits per second. SS with a number 10 next to it means 10 gigabits per second. SS with a 20 means USB 3.2 Gen 2 by 2 at 20 gigabits per second, though this only exists on USB-C ports, never Type A. If you see a number 40, that is USB 4 running at 40 gigabits per second. For charging capability, look for a battery icon or a lightning bolt symbol, which indicates USB power delivery support. This means the port can negotiate higher charging rates with compatible devices, sometimes up to 100 watts or even 240 watts on the newest USB-C power delivery 3.1 standard. A lightning bolt inside a small circle usually means Thunderbolt, not USB power delivery, so do not confuse the two. Thunderbolt ports support extremely high data rates and can daisy-chain multiple devices, but they are a separate technology that happens to use the USB-C connector. If there are no symbols printed anywhere, your only option is to check the specification sheet. Look up the motherboard model or laptop model and find the manual. It will list every port and its exact capabilities. This is tedious and annoying, but it is the only reliable method when manufacturers skip the labeling. The reality is that USB port colors are hints, not guarantees. Blue usually means 5 gigabits per second. Teal usually means 10 gigabits per second. Red, yellow, and orange usually indicate charging features. Black could mean anything from USB 2.0 to USB 3.2, depending on when the device was made. White means you are using a computer from the previous century, but none of these colors are mandatory. Manufacturers can paint ports however they want for aesthetic reasons. Some PC cases have all black ports, even though half of them are USB 2.0 and the other half are USB 3.1. Gaming laptops sometimes color code ports to match the brand's design language instead of following any logical standard. The only thing you can trust is printed symbols and technical specifications. Colors are outdated, inconsistent, and unreliable. If you want to know how those USB ports actually connect to displays and why some cables do things others cannot, check out Every Display Cable Explained.